The engine of my own Ford F-250 roared to life, its headlights cutting through the Saturday dusk and illuminating the laughing faces of other campers. Just before my son Max threw it in gear, kicking up gravel and leaving me alone in the sudden, deafening silence of the forest. The fog was already rolling in, damp and cold, carrying the sharp scent of pine and wet earth. It was 48 degrees and dropping. I could still hear his parting words echoing, full of that casual cruelty I'd started to notice. "Just a joke, Dad. Builds character. We'll be back in the morning." His girlfriend giggled from the passenger seat, a sound like shattering glass. They had my wallet, my phone, the keys to my life. They'd taken the cooler, the tent, even my heavy coat slung over the passenger seat. Max believed he'd left me with nothing but the thin shirt on my back and the chill of the coming night. He thought he'd stripped me bare. But my son had always been careless with details. My first instinct was to shout, to run after the disappearing taillights. But my legs felt rooted to the cold ground. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sickening. A family at a nearby campsite, the Millers, stared with open pity. Mr. Miller started to walk over, his brow furrowed with concern, but I just gave a weak shake of my head. I couldn't bear witnesses to my own son's treachery. I took a slow inventory. Worn jeans, a long-sleeved olive shirt, hiking boots. That was it. No food, no water, no shelter. He'd even taken my grandfather's old canvas pack. The truck, my fully stocked rig worth over $75,000 with all the custom gear, was my retirement. It was my freedom, and he treated it, and me, like a punchline. My hand went instinctively to my right pocket, a habit of 50 years in the woods. My fingers brushed against something small, hard, and familiar. The flint striker, a cheap little tool Max had smeared at just hours before. "Why do you even carry that old thing, Dad?" "I have 3 lighters in the console." I pulled it out. The small steel edge glinted faintly in the twilight. The fog thickened, swallowing the last of the light. Sounds became muffled, distant. The cheerful chatter from the other campsite faded into a low hum. I was alone, truly alone, in a way I hadn't been since Olga passed. The cold was starting to seep into my bones, a deep, invasive chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of absolute betrayal. I turned my back on the empty space where my truck had been and walked toward the tree line. Pity was a poison I couldn't afford to drink. My ranger training kicked in, a voice of pure, cold logic cutting through the anger and the hurt. First things first, shelter, then fire, then water. The sequence was as ingrained in me as breathing. Max had forgotten who taught him how to survive out here in the first place. I found a small rock overhang, not deep enough to be a cave, but enough to break the wind and shelter me from the worst of the condensing fog. I began gathering tinder, dry pine needles from under the thicket boughs, slivers of birch bark that peeled away like paper. My hands, stiff with cold, felt clumsy, but the familiar motions were a comfort. This was work. This was purpose. As I scraped away leaves, my fingers hit something plastic. It was a candy bar wrapper. The fancy imported kind Max's girlfriend, Chloe, always ate. She must have dropped it when they were helping me set up camp earlier. They'd been planning this while smiling to my face, sharing a sweet treat before leaving me to freeze. But that was only half the truth. Holding the flint striker in one hand and a shard of quartz I'd found in the other, I struck. A pathetic spark died in the damp air. Again, nothing. My knuckles were raw. Frustration, hot and sharp, flared in my chest. Max's mocking voice echoed in my head. "Just use a lighter, old man." I gripped my teeth and focused, shielding the tinder with my body. I would not die here. I would not give him that satisfaction. Finally, a real spark caught on a piece of birch bark. It glowed like an ember, a single point of defiant heat in the overwhelming cold. I blew on it gently, coaxing it, feeding it tiny twigs until a small, fragile flame flickered to life. The light pushed back the darkness, and the warmth was a promise. The fire was more than heat. It was a weapon. It was the beginning of my answer. The smell of damp earth and pine was a constant companion as the night deepened. Every snap of a twig in the woods made me turn my head, a foolish part of me, hoping it was the sound of the F-250 returning. But the logical part of me, the ranger, knew better. The tire tracks in the gravel drive led out to the main road, and they were pointed away from me. They were not coming back tonight. I thought about Olga. What would she have said about our son? She was the one who always made excuses for him, who saw the good in him even when it was buried under layers of selfishness. He has a good heart, Clive, she'd say. He just gets lost sometimes. He was more than lost now. He was a thief. He was a monster of his own making. My mind turned to the truck. Not just the machine, but what was inside it. In the glove compartment, tucked into the owner's manual, was the insurance policy. A specific, heavily negotiated commercial use policy I had taken out due to the expensive custom gear. I had insisted, against his protests, that Max be a co-signer on it, since he used the truck so often for his business ventures. A detail he surely forgot. It's just a formality, Dad, he had complained, scrawling his signature on the forms at the kitchen table 6 months ago. Such a pain. He hadn't read a single line of the 12-page document. I, on the other hand, had read every word. Twice, especially the clause on page 7, under the section titled Use and Responsibility. Section 7b, Negligent Endangerment. The fire crackled, its warmth a small mercy against the profound cold of the forest. The night was a vast, silent thing, punctuated by the occasional hoot of an owl. I was a 70-year-old man with no food, no communication, and a son who wished me ill. By all accounts, my situation was dire, but a slow, burning certainty began to replace the fear. Max had made a terrible mistake. He'd underestimated me. I had to survive the night, and then the next day, the nearest town was at least a 20-mile hike through dense woods. It was a daunting task, but not an impossible one. I had spent my entire life in these forests. I knew the trails, the streams, the shortcuts. This was my home, and he had abandoned me in my own backyard. That was his second mistake. Thirst began to claw at my throat. I knew a small stream ran about a quarter-mile east of the campsite. Using the faint glow of the rising moon, I navigated through the trees, the familiar weight of my feet on the pine-needle floor a strange comfort. Every step was deliberate. I would not fall. I would not break. My anger was a fuel, burning hotter and cleaner than any wood. I found the stream, its water running clear and cold over smooth stones. I knelt and drank deeply, the icy water a shock to my system. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. As I drank, I saw my reflection in a still pool, a tired old man with wild hair and dirt on his face. But my eyes, even in the dim light, held a glint of steel. It was the same look I'd seen in the mirror after Olga's funeral, the look of a man with nothing left to lose. Returning to my small shelter, I banked the fire to conserve wood and tried to get some rest. Sleep was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the smirk on Max's face, the casual dismissal in his wave as he drove away. The sound of Chloe's laughter echoed in my ears. It wasn't just a prank. It was a statement. They saw me as irrelevant, a fossil, a problem to be discarded. A plan began to form, piece by piece, in the cold, dark hours before dawn. It wasn't just about getting back to town. It was about reclamation. It was about justice. The truck was the weapon he had used against me, and the paperwork in its glove compartment would be the weapon I would use against him. A perfect, symmetrical reversal. He just didn't know it yet. I thought about the conversation I'd had with the insurance agent, a sharp young woman named Ms. Albright. She questioned the necessity of the negligent endangerment clause. "It's a very specific and rarely invoked addendum, Mr. Peterson," she had said. "Are you sure you meet it?" "Absolutely," I had replied. "One can never be too careful with valuable assets." She had shrugged and added it to the policy. The first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, turning the fog from black to a ghostly gray. The world was slowly returning. The birds began their morning chorus, oblivious to my plight. I extinguished the last of the embers, scattering the ashes so no trace of my fire remained. Leave no trace. It was the first rule of the wild. It was time to start walking. I stood and stretched my aching limbs. My body was stiff, my stomach empty, but my mind was clear and sharp. I looked at the faint impressions left by the truck's tires, a scar in the dirt pointing the way out. But I wouldn't follow the road. It would be the first place they'd expect me to be. I turned 90 degrees and headed straight into the deep woods, toward the old ranger trail. The harder path. The one they'd never think to look for me on. The forest floor was a familiar map under my feet. I moved with an economy of motion learned over 50 years, conserving energy, reading the landscape. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig was information. My anger had cooled into a single, sharp point of focus. I was not a victim seeking rescue. I was a predator on a long hunt, and the trail had just begun. I passed the old lightning-scarred oak where I taught a 10-year-old Max how to read a compass. "The needle always points home, Dad?" he had asked, his small face full of trust. "It always points north, son," I had corrected gently. "You have to figure out the way home yourself." It seemed he had forgotten that lesson entirely, choosing a different direction. He knew how to gut a fish, how to find dry wood, how to follow a trail. I had taught him all the practical things a man needs to know to master his environment. But I had failed to teach him that the skills were meant to build you up, not to tear someone else down. He knew how to take, but not how to earn. But that was only half the truth. By midday, a gnawing hunger had set in. I found a handful of late-season blackberries, their sweetness a sharp contrast to the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth. The sun remained hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and the damp cold was relentless. It felt like the world was holding its breath. The scent of pine and wet rot was everywhere, the perfume of my isolation. After what felt like an eternity, I recognized the distinct shape of Eagle Rock rising above the tree line. I was less than 2 miles from the old access road. A grim satisfaction settled in my chest. My body ached. My feet were blistered, but I had beaten the wilderness they'd left me in. I had beaten their assumptions. Now it was time to beat them. As I neared a bend in the trail that overlooked the road, I heard voices. Laughter. I froze, melting back into the shadows of the ferns and cedars. I crept forward until I could see them. It was Max and Chloe leaning against the guardrail, looking down at the valley. They hadn't gone to the city. They were still here, enjoying the view. "He's probably curled up under a log by now, crying for his mommy," Max said, and Chloe laughed that terrible sharp laugh. "Did you text the guy back?" she asked, pulling a vape pen from her pocket. "Yeah," Max replied. "He'll meet us tomorrow morning. $40,000 cash for the truck and everything in it. No questions asked. Easy." 40 grand, Chloe scoffed. "That's it, for that beast?" "Dave, it's fast," Max said, putting his arm around her. "We get the cash, the truck is his problem, and we're on a flight to Cabo by tomorrow afternoon. Think of it. No more listening to the old man drone on about the good old days. This was no prank, this was a liquidation." They thought I was 20 miles away, freezing and helpless. They were standing right here, plotting the final piece of their crime in the open air. I could smell her cloying vape smoke from my hiding place. I watched them get back into my truck, and drive off, heading towards the small town of Northwood. They had just given me their destination. They had given me everything. I stood there for a long time after they left, the silence of the forest pressing in on me. The rage was gone, replaced by something colder, heavier, a profound and total so. It took me another hour to reach the highway. I emerged from the trees, looking like a man who had been wrestling with the earth itself. I was covered in dirt and pine needles, my face scratched, my clothes torn. A sedan slowed as it passed, the driver's face a mixture of alarm and disgust, before speeding away. To the civilized world, I was just a vagrant, a problem to be avoided. I was at my lowest point, a ghost haunting the edge of a road I used to command in my powerful truck. Every joint in my body screamed in protest. For a fleeting moment, the odds felt impossible. A 70-year-old man with nothing but a flint striker and a story no one would believe. I thought of Olga and what she would say. Stand up, Clive. Just stand up. So I did. 2 miles down the road was a small 24-hour diner, its neon sign a beacon of breezy hope. The smell of frying bacon and coffee hit me like a physical blow. I walked in, and the handful of patrons stared. A young waitress with tired eyes and a kind face approached me. "Honey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just some car trouble," I rasped, my voice hoarse. "A long walk. Could I bother you for a cup of coffee and the use of your phone?" She didn't question me. She just pointed to a stool at the counter, poured a mug of black coffee, and slid the diner's cordless phone toward me. "Local calls are free," she said softly. Her small act of trust was the first warmth I'd felt in 24 hours. I didn't call the police. I dialed the number I knew by heart, the 1-800 number for my insurance provider. "Yes, I'd like to speak with Miss Albright in the Commercial Claims Division," I said, my voice gaining strength. "My name is Clive Peterson, policy number 77B451TX. Please tell her it's regarding an urgent invocation of Section 7B. Ms. Albright came on the line, her voice crisp and professional. "Mr. Peterson, is everything all right?" "No, Ms. Albright, it is not," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "My co-insured has willfully abandoned me in a hazardous situation, constituting gross negligence and endangerment. The vehicle, my primary asset, is currently being operated under fraudulent pretenses. I am invoking the clause." I could hear the clicking of her keyboard. "I see the clause here, Mr. Peterson," she said, a new note of seriousness in her voice. "It's ironclad. Invoking it immediately freezes all co-insured rights and triggers a review. If your claim is verified, it constitutes a material breach of the policy agreement. Your son would forfeit all insurable interest in the vehicle and its contents." "That is my understanding," I said. "What do you need from me?" "First, a police report for unauthorized use of a vehicle," she instructed. "Get a case number. Second, you need to sign a sworn affidavit detailing the events. I can email the forms to you right now. Once we have those two things, we can act. And Mr. Peterson, our actions are very swift." I got the diner's email address from the kind waitress. "I'll be back to pay you for this, for everything," I promised her. She just nodded and refilled my cup. As I drank the hot coffee, I felt the momentum shift. The gears of a great and impersonal machine were beginning to turn at my command. I was no longer a man stranded in a forest. I was a client. I was a plaintiff. My next stop was the Northwood Sheriff's Department. It was a small, tidy brick building, the flag outside hanging limp in the damp air. I walked in, my exhaustion masked by a rigid sense of purpose. I was no longer thinking about the cold, the hunger, or the pain in my feet. I was thinking only of paperwork, procedure, and consequence. The deputy at the desk was young, with a fresh face that suggested he'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with a ticket. He eyed my ragged appearance with suspicion. "Can I help you?" he asked, his hand resting near his sidearm. "I need to report the unauthorized use of my vehicle," I stated, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Clive Peterson." I laid out the facts without emotion. The make, model, and VIN of my truck. The name of the person who had taken it. Their last known location. I didn't say my son. I said the operator. I didn't say prank. I said unauthorized use. He typed it all into his computer, his skepticism slowly replaced by professional duty. He handed me a preliminary report with a case number printed at the top. It felt like a key. I found a cheap motel and paid with the emergency $100 bill Olga had made me stitch into my boot liner years ago. For a real emergency, Clive. Her voice from the past. I used the lobby's ancient computer to print the affidavit from Miss Albright. I signed it with a steady hand, my signature a firm black line of intent. It was all there, in cold, legal language, as the motel's fax machine whirred, sending my signed life back to the insurance company. I imagined the digital trail it was creating. I imagined an automated alert firing off to the secondary email on the account. Max's email. Policy update notification. I could almost see him, glancing at it on his phone, assuming it was junk mail, and deleting it without a thought. The arrogance of youth. It was his most reliable weakness. I lay on the lumpy motel bed, the paper copy of the police report on the nightstand next to me. The system was now engaged. The report was filed. The affidavit was sent. The contractual trap, written in fine print on page 7, had been sprung. Max was driving a stolen vehicle now, only he didn't know it. He was a ghost in a machine that was about to be exorcised. Sleep finally came. A heavy, dreamless state of pure exhaustion. I woke just after dawn to the sound of trucks rumbling by on the highway. My body felt like it had been hammered, but my mind was a block of ice. I showered, the hot water washing away the grime of the wilderness and the last vestiges of my old life. The man who stepped out of the steam was not the same man who had walked into the woods. I dressed in the same clothes, still damp. They were a reminder, a uniform. At 8 a.m. sharp, my phone rang. The motel phone. It was Ms. Albright. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "We have everything we need. The policy has been provisionally voided with respect to your son's insurable interest, pending final review. We flagged the vehicle for repossession." "Repossession?" I asked, the word tasting like victory. "Yes," she confirmed. "We have a contractor in Northwood. They're very efficient. Based on the information you provided about his intent to sell, time is of the essence. We're acting immediately. Do you have a current location for the vehicle?" I knew exactly where he'd be. There's only one place in town that deals in that kind of private, no questions asked cash sale, I told her. Miller's Auto Yard, on the south end of town. I pictured the place, a greasy, sprawling lot filled with rusting hulks and broken dreams. A fitting stage for the final act. I could hear her typing. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. We'll handle it from here." I knew I had to be there. I paid a local taxi driver $50, half of what I had left, to take me to the edge of town and wait. We parked a block away from Miller's, with a clear view of the entrance. The diner waitress had filled a thermos with coffee for me, a small kindness that felt monumental. I sat in the back of the cab, sipping the hot liquid, and watched. Around 9:30 a.m., my truck pulled into the lot, my F-250. It looked magnificent, even covered in a layer of road dust. Max got out, looking confident, followed by Chloe. A burly man with a greasy ponytail, presumably Miller, came out to meet them. They started to haggle, their gestures animated and aggressive. Max was trying to sell my life for 40 grand. As they were arguing, a sleek black tow truck pulled up to the entrance of the auto yard, blocking the exit. It had no company name on the side, just a phone number. 2 men got out. They were big, wearing plain gray work shirts, and they moved with an unnerving efficiency. They weren't there to negotiate. One held a tablet. The other held a set of keys and a slim Jim. They walked directly toward my truck. Max turned, his face a mask of confusion and annoyance. "Hey, could I help you guys?" he called out, his voice full of luster. The man with the tablet didn't even look at him. He simply said, "We're here for the F-250. Policy breach. Step aside, sir." His tone was flat, final. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. "What policy?" "Who the hell are you?" Max sputtered, stepping in front of the truck. "This is my truck." The second man was already at the driver's side door, slim Jim in hand. "No, sir," the first man said, finally looking at Max with cold, bored eyes. "According to our records as of 8:02 a.m. this morning, it isn't." Chloe's face went pale. Miller, the junkyard owner, backed away slowly, putting his hands up as if to say he wanted no part of this. The second man had the door open in seconds. The alarm, which Max had probably forgotten how to disable, began to blare, a pathetic scream of protest. It was a beautiful sound. The sound of my son's world coming undone. Max lunged for the man, but he was effortlessly pushed aside. "Sir, Interfering with a legal repossession is a criminal offense, the man said calmly, as his partner got behind the wheel and disabled the alarm. The police have already been notified of this action. Max stood there, frozen, as the engine of his getaway vehicle rumbled to life under someone else's control. From my vantage point in the taxi, I saw the exact moment Max's brain finally processed the words on the man's tablet. His face contorted, first with disbelief, then with a dawning, sickening horror. He looked around wildly as if searching for an answer in the greasy landscape of the junkyard. His eyes scanned the road, and for a heart-stopping second, they met mine. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just held his gaze, my face a blank slate. In that single silent moment across the distance, he understood everything. He saw the flint striker. He saw the cold night in the woods. He saw page 7, section 7B. He saw the trap he had walked into with a smug grin on his face. He saw me. The tow truck driver hitched my F-250 to his rig with practice speed. The whole operation took less than 5 minutes. It was a masterpiece of brutal corporate efficiency. Chloe started screaming at Max, a torrent of accusations and panic. He just stood there, speechless, watching his $40,000, his trip to Cabo, his entire future being towed away. The man with the tablet walked over to me as the tow truck pulled out onto the road. He knocked on the taxi window. I rolled it down. "Mr. Peterson?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me a simple key ring. On it were the keys to my F-250. "Your vehicle will be at our secure impound lot. You can pick it up any time after noon. The fees have been waived." He also handed me a small, sealed evidence bag. Inside it was the contents of the glove compartment, the owner's manual, the registration, and the insurance policy, its crisp pages a testament to my foresight. He'd even retrieved my wallet and phone from the center console. He hadn't missed a single detail. The flint striker, still in my pocket, felt warm. I turned back to look at the junkyard. Max and Chloe were standing alone in the empty space where my truck had been. They were arguing now, their voices sharp and ugly, carried on the morning air. They had nothing. No truck, no money, no escape. They were stranded, just as they had left me. The symmetry was perfect. The restoration of balance was complete. I thought about Olga one last time. Not her forgiving nature, but her fierce, protective side. The side that came out when her family was threatened. She would not have approved of my methods, but she would have understood the result. She would have understood the necessity of a hard lesson delivered without sentiment. "Where to now, mister?" the taxi driver asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. He had seen the whole thing, a silent witness to the quiet demolition of a young man's life. He didn't ask any questions. He just waited for my command. I looked at the keys in my hand, the weight of them solid and real. I leaned forward, my voice steady and clear. "Take me to the impound lot," I said. Then I picked up my phone, my fingers scrolling through the contacts until I found the name, Max. I held the phone to my ear, listening to it ring, and pressed cancel insurance. The call disconnected.